So we're going to spend a little time running through sort of the fundamentals of most effectively managing each of these 8 drivers of cash flow. So the first one is sales growth. I want all of my clients and the people that I help to become a data-driven sales organization versus an anecdote-driven sales organization. Because when you're a data-driven sales organization, you become captain of your ship, and it doesn't matter whether the economy is doing this. Your sales pipeline should not be doing this along with the economy. Your sales pipeline should be doing this even while the economy's moving up and down, because you're more competitive and more effective and able to increase market share regardless of what the market's doing. You're able to do that as a rule of thumb until you reach about 60% market share. Once you get to 60% market share, markets tend to like diversity. So even if you're a better ran business with a better value offering, etc., you can still get above 60% market share. It just becomes incrementally harder, as you escalate above that. But in most markets, you can pretty easily run up the score to 60% market share if that's what your vision is. Most won't, because in many markets that means you're billions of dollars in business, and you will have achieved your wealth mark and vision long before that. In any case, you want to be a data-driven sales organization. That means you got to start with some data. So that means we want to do some formalized market analysis, so we know how many fish are in that pond before we drop a line into it. We want to do some competitive analysis, so we know how many other guys are fishing in that pond that we got to compete against. We want to do some capacity analysis so that we know with the resources and funds available to us, how big of a net can we cast. So we don't want to reverse engineer a company to $30 million in sales when we're only capable of doing 20 with the resources available. We also don't want to reverse engineer the business to do $5 million in sales when we're capable of doing 10. So understanding what your capacities are, also identifying any additional capacity that you can add that has little barrier to entry, meaning new markets you can serve that don't require a huge amount of capital expenditures or a giant leap in your technical ability. You also want to look at margin mix analysis, where all the different products or services or market sectors that you service or supply or build for, they'll sort of have their own inherent profit margins that line up with that particular category. You want to understand what profit margins are associated with what category so that you can appropriately stack your work in the more profitable areas most of the time. That data then becomes the foundation of your sales house. That data will inform the efforts that you have to make to reverse engineer the sales volume that you want. It'll tell you if you're a contracting company, the data is telling me I have to prepare X amount of bids per month on average, add maybe a 35 to 45% intentional bid to award ratio. And then the data tells me that this is how much cash and profit and sales I'm going to generate as a result. It's a little bit of an oversimplification, but you want to use that data to inform the sales efforts and sales channels that are appropriate, so you take away trial and error associated with your sales and marketing efforts. And you are able to use that data to intentionally reverse engineer your targeted sales volume in a relatively recession-proof way. Second one is gross profit. So gross profit, in business, you make money what I call above the line with how you price things. You make money below the line with how well you manage costs once you've won the work. So we want to make sure we're utilizing tools like break-even analysis and some of our other accounting tools to make sure we're effectively, competitively pricing while still making money. And then we're applying some of the things we've been discussing: job descriptions, operating procedures, performance-based pay, formalized staffing compensation plan, all by the numbers. Because remember, 17 to 23% improvement in staff productivity, 3 to 5% improvement in material or repairs or etc., all of that pushes down your cost of goods sold, which increases your gross profit. So just executing on those business fundamentals while having better commanded data associated with your pricing. Overhead expenses. So the easiest way to reduce overhead is as a percentage of sales is increase your sales without increasing your overhead. Easy enough. However, we want to make sure we've got a formalized administrative flow of work plan where all of our billing, paying, accounting functions, compliance functions, payroll functions, etc., are all within this highly organized, mapped out administrative flow of work plan that's so system-centric that you can plug and play bodies in and out of the system, but the system remains. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a business where we've been hamstrung by what I call the Mary Sues of the world, where we'll have a Mary Sue who's been in charge of our office for years. She's the only one who really knows where the bodies are hidden or how the bank account works or how our accounting structure works, the filing system, etc. And then God forbid we lose Mary Sue to maternity leave or retirement or something like that. Now the business is flying almost completely blind for 6 or 7 months, and they're calling me in to solve that problem. The way you preempt that and the way you keep overhead expenses under control is by having this really well-defined administrative flow of work plan that, again, is so system and process centric. You can plug and play bodies in and out of the system, but the system remains. The next two we're going to talk about together, accounts receivable and accounts payable. So those first three things, sales growth, gross profit, overhead expenses, those are the primary drivers of cash flow in your business. Because if you're not good at those three things, you don't have a sustainable business. The next three things, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and inventory, those are what we call the swing drivers of cash flow. Because even if you're performing really well at those first three items, you can swing over into not having any cash available because your inventory is too high, you're collecting your receivables too slow, you're paying your payables too fast. It depletes all the cash in the company. Even if you're in a type of business that doesn't really require inventory, just the push-pull on accounts receivable and accounts payable can bleed you dry. What I mean by that is, imagine you got these two pipes. You got water coming in through this pipe, and you got water going out through that pipe. And they're bound together by this expandable bladder or a balloon. Well, if you remember from high school physics class, what happens to that balloon if you increase how fast the water's coming in while slowing down how fast the water's going out? The balloon expands, right? Sometimes people say the balloon bursts, but it doesn't burst because the water coming in is your accounts receivable. The water going out is your accounts payable. That balloon is your bank account. I promise your bank will let you hold as much money in there as you want. What happens in the opposite situation? If the water's coming in slower than it's going out, then you create a vacuum and that balloon will pinch off. So where do we most commonly see that? We're collecting our receivables in 60 days. We're paying all of our bills in 15 days. That means there is a 45-day gap that you have to fund or a hole that you have to fill. The only thing that can fill that hole is either your profit margins or outside money you're bringing in, like a line of credit or your own money. So we want to make sure that gap is as small as possible. Now, where people get in trouble is each one of those days, if you've got a 45-day gap, has a dollar amount associated with it that is required to cover the gap. So for example, if you're doing $1 million in sales, it's one amount, X, per day that you have to fund. If you're doing $10 million in sales, then it's Z, a much higher amount per day that you have to fund. So the 45-day gap can stay static, but as your sales pipeline increases, the amount that you have to fund per day can eventually become so high that you bankrupt yourself as a result of your own success. You ran sales up too quickly, making the dollar amount per day more than you can cover for that 45-day gap in this instance. So if you ever wondered why you're generating less cash than you do profit, it's almost always because you're collecting slower than you're paying. That gap is eating up all of your profit. Or if you've got a business that requires a fair amount of inventory stocking, you're carrying excess inventory and that's eating up all your cash, or a combination of all of those. So the way you solve this problem, the rule of thumb with cash flow management on the swing drivers is collect as fast as you can, pay as slow as you can, keep your inventory as low as you can in most instances. Now, in a lot of the industries, especially some contractor segments, it's not possible that you're going to collect faster than you pay. In those instances, you go back to that hole that's inherently built into your market niche, and you come at that working capital deficit, or that hole that you have to fill from two directions. Number one, even if you can't eliminate the gap, you shorten the gap as much as possible. So maybe that means that we're currently collecting in 60 days and paying in 15 days. We're going to shorten it down to 45 and 30. So now we only have a 15-day gap to cover. Essentially, we've made that hole smaller so it's more easy to fill, while simultaneously increasing our profit margins through some of the better business management activities that we've been discussing. So now you have a smaller hole with more dirt available to fill it with. You then overflow the hole and you get into what we call free cash flows, or money that you can pay yourself with. So we want to manage those swing drivers so we're able to execute on that 70-30 rule and keep the business healthy. And then the next one on the list is capital expenditures. We just want to make sure when we got to buy trucks, equipment, facilities, etc., that we're not doing it in response to our accountant saying, you've got a whole bunch of profit you got to get rid of, so go buy something. We want to buy equipment within that formalized staffing, compensation, facilities, equipment plan, etc., at each growth ring when it's appropriate to do so. And of course, we want to do that in a tax advantageous way when we have to buy equipment, but we don't want to do it just sort of ad hoc. We want to do it in a controlled, organized way where when we make the purchase, we already know that we're going to be utilizing it at nearly max utilization rate, and then finance in a way that makes sense for the cash flow of the business. And then the last one is taxes. Again, that being the broad rubric of asset protection, tax reduction or tax avoidance, and tax advantageous succession planning. We just want to make sure we've got our ducks in a row there so that you're not paying more than your fair share of taxes, more than the law requires, because you don't have a good understanding of the law and your current professionals don't. So you pay more than your fair share. That obviously hurts cash flow. You also don't want to tank the business's cash flow because you had a huge asset exposure liability. Somebody got hurt or killed on the job, God forbid. You had a huge liability event. Your assets were not shielded and protected, and now you got to replace them all. So obviously that would have a detrimental impact on cash flow. Same thing with the tax consequences of an unplanned for succession event, meaning one of the partners has what we call the 4 Ds: death, divorce, disability, or dissolution of partnership, all of which create some taxable events. So those are the 8 drivers of cash flow. We manage those utilizing that business foundation that we've been discussing, those 12 gears in our gearbox. So you're ultimately producing the quality of life you want in a cash flow centric enterprise.